Hello, welcome to Record Sports Hotline Live. My name is Daniel Conn. It's a full house tonight. I'm joined by the one and only Keith Jackson. Keith, how's it going?
Not bad. You're full of business tonight, Daniel.
I'm right up for it. This is a big one tonight. We're also joined by Record Sports Scott McDermott. Scott, how's it going?
I'm good, Daniel. Right, something happened. You seem quite kind of. Is there news to talk about?
We'll come to that. Don't you worry. And Andy Newport joins us as well. Andy, you will?
No, I'm bracing myself for the next 2 weeks. That's surely going to be the most painful and something that me and Scott have to go through on what seems to be a yearly basis is upon us once again.
That's right. It's October time, so Rangers are looking for a new manager.
Well, look, Scott mentioned there's only one place for us to start. And of course, it's Kilmarnock's 2-0 win over St Mirren. Obviously, Russell Martin, since we did the hotline last night, Keith, he's gone, Russell Martin. I think the scenes in the car park were just a step too far for the Rangers hierarchy, obviously.
Well, all that was unfolding while we were on. And, you know, it becomes very difficult. I think, look, the telltale sign is when you see the manager with his bag walking across a pitch to find the side exit, you know it's end of days. The moment has arrived, and obviously that was the fate that was befalling Russell Martin yesterday, shortly after the final whistle at Falkirk. That he's managed to survive this long, I think, is the only surprise. The only surprise that he was appointed in the first place was a major surprise to me, and nothing that's happened subsequently has changed my opinion on that. This is a guy that failed spectacularly at Southampton, was shown the door after 16 games. Rangers gave him one game more than that before making the same obvious conclusion. What the thinking was when they made that appointment, I just will never know. I heard all this stuff about he interviewed really well. Did he? You just need to look at his CV. His CV did not entitle him to get an opportunity the size and scale of being the manager at Glasgow Rangers, or the head coach, as they call it. And it ended inevitably. And I think the only people that didn't see that coming were the two guys that headed up the recruitment process, Kevin Thelwell, who remains, and Greta Steinson, who was more to do with Leeds at the time of the 49ers takeover, but has moved into a more central role. I think he will be involved again in this, and that becomes the big issue. I've just written a story just about to go up online. I think Rangers held a sort of crisis summit in the boardroom this afternoon. I think Parag Marath was on it. Andrew Kavanagh, the chairman and owner, was on it. But Kevin Thelwell and Patrick Stewart were also there on the call. And I would imagine there've got to be some serious questions being asked of their part in all of this. But I think, Daniel, you're going to refer to an open letter which has been issued and just moments before we came on air by Parag Marath and Andrew Kavanagh, an open letter to the supporters. And both Kevin Thelwell and Patrick Stewart are name checked in it, and without any sort of a criticism, and kind of restating that these guys are in charge of the kind of day-to-day basics of the football operation. I don't think that's what the Rangers fans wanted to hear, but there was an interesting line towards the end of the open letter, which I think was quite a concession from Andrew Kavanagh and Parag Marath, which is they understand that they need to earn the trust of the Rangers supporters.
Yeah, your loyalty to the club through thick and thin is something we do not take for granted. We see the effort and emotion you put into supporting Rangers. It drives us every day. We intend to earn your trust because we all share the same goal, restoring success to Rangers, Andrew and Parag.
Yeah, well, I think that's quite smart. I think that might take a bit of the heat out of the situation. I think that they desperately need to bring the Rangers fans back on board, back on side. And I'll be honest with you, my reading of this situation is that Kevin Thelwell had tied his colours to the mast of Russell Martin. And I don't think he was for budging. And I believe that what we've seen in the last 24 hours, that's why we were saying after, on the show last night, Daniel, I wasn't sure that even at, as low as it was getting for Rangers, I wasn't sure that they were ready to act. And I think basing that around Kevin Thelwell's sort of ideas on it, and I believe that he was the guy that has talked Andrew Kavanagh back off a ledge a few weeks ago when Andrew Kavanagh might have been ready to step into it. And I think that what you saw yesterday was the situation had reached a ridiculous level. Andrew Kavanagh went in and grabbed the bull by the horns effectively, and he is calling the shots here. And it's quite interesting in that open letter that they're talking about having a real sort of hands-on approach to this recruitment process, which I'm not sure that they had the last time. In fact, I'm very sure that it was delegated completely to Thelwell and Steinson. And I think the Americans have realised that was mistake number one, and they can't let the same process deliver a similar result this time around.
But Jacko, what does that say then? I mean, so you're saying basically the Americans are going to say, look, we don't. That appointment went bad. Kevin and Greta, didn't do it. It was asked of them. So the next manager, we're going to be hands-on. I mean, what does that say about your sporting director? And
well, I think personally, Scott. Personally, I think that Kevin Thelwell's position is close as possible to being untenable already. If you look, right, first decision, Kevin Thelwell, manager, please, Russell Martin. That's a cracker, right? So that on its own, if you take that decision, that appointment in isolation, Kevin Thelwell's in a really difficult spot. Then you look at the recruitment that's come in. It's been nowhere near good enough. It was meant to be an overhaul of the squad, and what you've got in reality is downgrades in almost every position that Kevin Thelwell has been in charge of the recruitment. And then on top of all that, if that's not bad enough, he's appointed his own son to the role
that's what I was going to say. So if they've got doubts over Kevin Thelwell's ability to do the job, why 4 days ago are they allowing them to appoint 3 new guys to the recruitment department?
Scott, I completely agree with you, and I'm finding that a difficult circle to square, if you know what I mean. Either the Americans were unaware, and I just refuse to believe that. I refuse to believe that Andrew Kavanagh and his board and, Paragmaras, the vice chairman, I refuse to believe that it didn't come across their desk, this idea to make that appointment. Now, what's interesting is the appointment still hasn't been confirmed. So you're wondering if someone somewhere is thinking it might be a good idea to chuck that one straight into a bin. Because I'm not sure, if you're trying to win friends and influence people amongst the support base right now, the last thing that you need is Thelwell Jr. turning up. So it's interesting, Russell Martin had obviously had the conversation with Kevin Thelwell about the potential appointment of his son, because he said as much, didn't he, Andy, before the game last week? He mentioned and he spoke kind of very positively about Robbie Thelwell's credentials for the role, and I think he went as far as to say, look, do you think that Kevin would be making an appointment like this if he didn't have full faith in how good the boy is? Because, if anything, it makes it even more important that he's really, really good, because he's also the son of the father. So let's see, because, it seemed like a fait accompli. It's gone pretty quiet. If I was the Americans, I'd be advising them to ditch that idea as a matter of urgency. Because if you're looking at people with a major credibility problem, right now, Kevin Thelwell's top of the list, and Patrick Stewart's not very far behind him.
Yeah, we've got plenty of comments coming in, and if you're watching at home and you want to let us know your thoughts on the latest Rangers managerial saga, please do so. I'll run through a few of these, if you guys are okay with that. William says, I would not trust them with recruiting the new manager. Craigie says, it has to be Steven Gerrard again to get this season back on track. Pete says, you can't blame Russell for signing 5 million Cortez or Desser's Igamani behaviour or Tavernier being past his sell-by date. Our regular Rangers Easy OK says the jury's out in Thelwell, but for me, Patrick Stewart now has to leave. Back Clement after Queen's Park, back Martin after some of the most disgraceful results in our history. Quite strong this, he says, Russell Martin is a stain in our club, the worst manager in our history. For me, any one of Gerrard, Muscat or McInnes will be acceptable. And just finally, Thomas says, Keith, what's the odds the next Rangers manager getting sacked before the end of the season?
Well, that's interesting, and I'm sure this will become part of the discussion with the boys. For me, right now, if you've got a top-level candidate that you want to speak to, that you want to lure into this position, if I'm that guy, if I'm Steven Gerrard, if I'm Kevin Muscat, whoever, if Derek McInnes, whoever I am, if I'm going into this process, I'm not turning up for an interview. I'm turning up to interview Kevin Thirlwell. I'm turning up to interview Patrick Stewart, and I'm working out in my head if I'm going to damage my reputation by being part of that. And unfortunately, that's the position that Rangers are in right now. If there are leading candidates, if there are managers out there that have options and other clubs showing interest in them, the first thing that they have to do is make sure that the house that they're about to move into is in some sort of order. And that's why I'm saying that this interview process could be more about the candidates interviewing the people that are intending to hire them. And that's, I mean, you could say that's the tail wagging the dog, but I think that's the situation that Rangers have allowed themselves to get into. And it's really difficult now for Andrew Kavanagh and Parag Marath. They made these appointments and they've got to be conscious of the reputational damage that has been done over a very short space of time. And I think, you know, look, I'll be blunt. I've spoken to one or two people that are involved that represent managers. They've all said the same thing, that would be a major red flag, that the club feels really unstable and there's not a lot of faith out there in the people that are making key decisions. If you're an agent and you're representing the manager, or if you're a manager, you've got to be really careful of that, because, and it comes back to the point there, you could go in full of good intentions and, you know, believe in yourself and back yourself. But if you find out that the environment, the working environment isn't right, the people around you aren't right, then yeah, you could be out of a job by February.
See what you're saying there, Jack, and I don't disagree with a lot of what you've said, but I find it incredible that you're even using the word unstable for Rangers at the minute. Because
what? Are you kidding me on?
No, seriously, because you think of where Rangers have been in situations the last few years, right? Last 10, 15 years, and you would have said Rangers unstable. When Derek McInnes knocked him back the last time for the job, you'd have said unstable. We're talking about a club now that, it was only a few months ago we were saying this is a new dawn at Ibrox. This is new owners, financial backing, 49ers enterprises backing a sound footing again, proper people in the boardroom. We were all looking at the profiles of these guys and thinking this is exactly what the club needed.
And I think they've made major mistakes in key appointments, Scott, and that's created this instability.
That's why I'm saying it's incredible, because it should be anything but unstable just now. The whole idea with the takeover was that it was going to be super stable, and they were going to appoint a sporting director, a head of recruitment, a chief scout, an academy director. They're going to sort out Auchenhowie. They were going to get this financial backing that would take away any worry or any danger. So, as I say, that's what I'm saying. I don't disagree with you, but I just think it's incredible that we're at this point already where we're saying people are actually questioning whether it's a good time to get into Rangers because of instability. I mean, that's a damning indictment, I think, of what's going on.
I'm afraid it all fires straight back at Kevin Thirlwell, because, you know, during the last process, he made it clear that he wanted to take, you know, more of the responsibility in terms of recruitment. And so it was made clear that the candidates would have an input, but really it's done by committee, and kind of he would be head of the committee, but nobody would really have to name him if things didn't work out particularly well in the transfer market, all these sort of things. And it's left a situation where, whether it's, you know, it was Russell Martin that was given the players in his dressing room, I'm sure that he would have had input in some of that recruitment. But the recruitment's been awful. And I'm sorry, but, you know, we're just going through the list of things that give Kevin Thirlwell a real reputational problem right now. And right at the top of that list as well is the signing for £8 to £10 million of a striker who doesn't score goals.
Jack, for me, the biggest indictment of Kevin Thirlwell was the fact he's been given a chance to pick his own manager, and he's had to rip it up and start it again inside 122 days.
100%.
And to be honest, the fact it was amazing that he made it that long. I mean, I remember sitting after the Bruges game at home when Ibrox reached its. I would say that's probably about as toxic as I've seen it that early in a season ever. And for me, he was done that night. He was over. Russell Martin, there was no turning back from that point. The fans had made their mind up. 50,000 people at that game telling him where to go. He was done at that point. Now, the fact then that Kevin Thelwell backed him and continued back, okay, that's fine. You can show him a wee bit of support. But in the face of all evidence that suggested that he wasn't turning us around, they continued to back him after the Hearts game, scraping a win against Livingston. In fact, the Bruges away, I think me and Scott were there that night. We thought he was we were sitting at the airport the next morning making phone calls to people at the club saying, I take it that's it. And I remember sitting there when we get the text through saying, no, we're sticking by him. And look at sheer just shock amongst the travelling journalists there going, can't believe it, they're doing this. He was done there and then. So the fact that Kevin Thelwell has picked a manager that's had to be replaced inside, could easily have been done inside 100 days. That's the most damning indictment of the lot for me. It doesn't look great. The fact that you get one shot at a manager and it blows up your face within less than 3 months. That for me should have been. That for me is why he has major question marks over his own future. And I think you're right. I think it would be a huge gamble for the owners now to entrust him to go and pick another manager. I think that's where you're at now. I think, I remember speaking to Michael Wall a few weeks ago, and he was saying, he's risking his reputation with the Chermiti signing. I think his reputation amongst the eyes of the vast majority of Rangers fans is toast. Like Russell Martin, they've made their mind up on Kevin Thelwell and Patrick Stewart. I think they go. I think you're reaching. Yeah, this is a 3-pronged process for the Rangers fans, as far as I'm concerned. First of it was getting rid of Russell Martin. Stages 2 and 3 are getting rid of Kevin Thelwell and Patrick Stewart. I don't think, unless there's a huge dramatic upturn, unless they pull a rabbit out of the hat in terms of this managerial appointment, bring in a Jose Mourinho or a Pep Guardiola, I don't think you're seeing the punters changing their opinion on those two guys. And I think they're going to feel a bit of the heat, a bit of the scrutiny really turning on them now.
Well, I think part of the problem with that, Andy, and you're right, by the way, if they pulled some incredible rabbit out of the hat. But the impression that I'm given of Kevin Thelwell is he wants to make it clear to whoever might be positioned, and even the fact that it's Rangers are now appointing head coach, right? That's just not the way that club operates. Rangers have a manager, but Kevin Thelwell didn't want a manager. He wanted somebody that he felt he had control over. That he's the most senior guy at the football club. He's the guy that holds the authority, that holds all the power. And guys like Jose Mourinho or top-notch guys, they won't entertain that. They would walk into the room and say, I'll take this job, but I want autonomy when it comes down to what players I'm going after. I want this, I want that. And Kevin Thelwell seemed to me, and that's what the whole Russell Martin appointment seemed wrong off from the start. It was like he was wanting to appoint a manager that was almost just grateful to be there.
I think
glad for the opportunity.
I think the biggest problem, I said this to Scott earlier on today, was that they've tried to do too much too soon. They've tried to change too much about the very fabric of Rangers, how it operates, even the culture of how they play football and how they expect the fans to react to the football they see in the pitch. They've tried to change too much too soon. And
I think the Rangers fans would have it, Andy.
Yourself, yeah, it can be. Listen, I don't buy all these arguments. Oh, you see other clubs do it. Other clubs aren't like Rangers and Celtic. Motherwell do not operate anything like the you get in Rangers and Celtic. It's just, they're different worlds. But for me, they've tried to change. Instead of just going, let's get somebody who's just a solid manager, build up, add all the wee frills as you go, step by step. No, they've tried to go from 0 to 100 in one summer, basically, and it's not worked.
Andy, that's because there's the people at the club making the big decisions, i.e. on going and get a new manager, have no understanding of what's required to be a Rangers manager. They have no understanding of what's required as a player to be successful at Rangers?
They were warned. We sat down with the club in the summer. We sat down with the coaching staff, and we were lucky to get a night with them just so we could, pick their brains about certain things. And we spelled out to them, listen, this is a club that the pressure, the scrutiny is unlike anything you'll face before. Russell Martin should have known this. He's played here before. And you say to them, you just have to, it's about winning. It's not about fancy football. It's not about, especially not in the first season. All that can come as you develop, as you grow. The first season is about winning and showing progress. That's a Rangers team that went backwards at a rate of knots. And I think you're absolutely right that they have absolutely failed to grasp the reality of what football in Glasgow is all about. But they were warned. The fans have warned them. The fans warned them they didn't want Russell Martin not because of anything to do with his image, his suit, his hair, his glasses, because he's fundamentally, his track record as a football manager wasn't that great coming in. What had he done to show that he was qualified for a job of that stature? He won, you look at his record, 250 games as a manager at MK Dons, at Swansea, at Southampton, and he won as many games as he lost. And that is exactly the path that he's followed in Glasgow. And that is why he's out of a job. So
was a bit of arrogance then, Andy, that maybe behind the scenes, this is Scottish football. We'll cruise this. Maybe not saying that outright, but
arrogance. But I just think I think they've entirely misread the reality of what Scottish football, and especially fun football, is all about.
I think it is arrogance, Andy. And do you know why it's arrogance? Because people told them, warned them, as you said, before Russell Martin's appointment, this has got car crash written all over it. But they were arrogant. They believed that they knew better and they pressed ahead anyway. And I think they did that under the guided belief that if you've been a manager at any level in England, never mind the Premier League, well, if you've managed in the Premier League, you're absolutely going to coast it in Scottish football. Absolutely. Even if they appoint the worst ever manager in the history of the English Premier League, and Russell Martin is right up there, he's still way too good for Scottish football. That's the basis that they made these decisions. That's the basis that they've done their player recruitment. And it's failed spectacularly and horribly. And I think that leaves huge question marks over the judgment and sort of a professional calibre of the guys that are making these decisions, Kevin Thelwell in particular.
By the way, it's scary thing is,
you look at Max Allen's 100 games in the Premier League, and he is absolutely short of confidence. The lad. Now what that doesn't tell you, the Premier League, if it's a barometer for anything, it certainly doesn't guarantee you that you're cut out for life at Old Firm.
No.
The scary thing is, if it's true that the two main candidates were Russell Martin and David Ancelotti, and Ancelotti looks as if he'd have been an even worse appointment. Which is some God. In all seriousness, that's the two guys that you've narrowed it down to. It's the two guys that you thought would go into Rangers and be successful. It just goes back to what I say, people with no understanding of what's required to do that job.
So I'm going to ask you to then, do Rangers pivot? Because that was part of the whole process, that they were going blue sky thinking, they were wanting a head coach, not a manager. And the whole style of play had to be a guy that manages to reinvent the wheel. That was the box that Russell Martin ticked for them, and Ancelotti for that matter. So what now? Do they rip that up? Is that still
for me? It's a back to basics approach.
I know, but I'm asking about them, Andy. You're right, by the way. We all know what the right thing to do is.
I think that's the way they have to go, because I don't think if they go and replace a carbon copy of Russell Martin as the next Rangers manager, well, then hell mend them, the place will go bonkers, frankly, as if it's not been bonkers already. For me, it's a back to basics approach. It's a Dyche, it's a Gerrard, it's a Derek McInnes, definitely. One of those three types. Somebody that it's a figurehead, it's a leader of men, it's somebody who, first and foremost, it's not about coaching or counter-pressing or 4-3-3, it's about standards. It's about holding your teammates accountable, your players accountable, yourself accountable, looking at yourself in the mirror and be able to say that you can give your absolute best. And you can see that's kind of maybe dinosaur mentality of all the rest of it. But for me, the reason why Rangers haven't performed this season is because they haven't lived up to the basics of what it is to be a Rangers player and that, or Old Firm player, that is to win games week in, week out. So for me, you start off with somebody who will fundamentally just care about results, not performances, doesn't care. It's all about 3 points. And then as the seasons go by, you look to add to that. You look to add the thrills. You look to add the wee flashy touches, and you can bring in, you can develop the club. I mean, at the end of the day, this was a club that has basically been, you know, they've had to rip things up and start again this summer. They've, you know, the staff leaving on a weekly basis. They're having to bring in new people in all manner of positions and start again. So it was a blank slate, but that doesn't mean you can go, as I say, from A to Z without going through B, C, D, and all the rest, all the way up. I think they've tried to do things too quickly, too soon. And if they want to get to a position where they've got somebody, a coach that plays this fantastic flow of football, great. But do it once the club's ready for it. The club wasn't ready for it this summer, nowhere near it.
We've got the comments coming in thick and fast. And again, if you're watching at home, please let us know your thoughts. Obviously, attention now turns to who's going to replace Russell Martin. Before we do that, Andy, I think have you got other commitments you need to head off for?
Yeah, I will leave you to you three to it.
Cheers, Andy. It's always a pleasure.
Cheers, Andy.
Andy Newport there. As I say, guys, it's all about who's going to replace Russell Martin now. Let me throw some of these comments at you. Gianni, our old pal Gianni, says, look at the style of football the Motherwell manager's creating under the same amount of time and about £30 million less budget. Dante says it will be Dyche given the Everton connection already in place. William says should have stuck with Barry Ferguson. Thomas says they should go for Jurgen Klopp just for the banter. This one from David Watson, he's a jambo. Keep away from Derek. He wouldn't. Paul Brady also says, in my opinion, McInnes is the obvious choice. And then we've got a lot of people saying Gerrard as well, guys. So definitely a very eclectic mix in the comment section.
Scott?
I think McInnes is the obvious choice, Daniel. I think the answer's staring them in the face. Rangers, I think it probably has been at various times over the last kind of decade, and they've not done it for one reason or another. I agree with Andy. It is time for Rangers to get back to basics. They need a manager, not a head coach. They need a figurehead. They need someone who understands the club, understands Scottish football, knows what it takes to be successful there. You're talking about a guy, we've mentioned it on here before, you're talking about a guy who Walter Smith wanted to be Rangers manager at some point. And if that's not a glowing or a ringing endorsement, I don't know what is. It's more difficult now for them to get him because he's at Hearts and he's doing really well. He's just at the start of a kind of lengthy contract at Hearts. But if Rangers really want Derek McInnes, if Kevin Thelwell decides he's the man and that's the route they want to go down, then Rangers should just go and get him. Doesn't matter how much it costs. Doesn't matter where Hearts are in the league. No, they need to give Derek McInnes a decision to make by speaking to Hearts, finding out what it's going to take. To get Derek McInnes to speak to them and get it done. No, if you're a proper, talking about Rangers here, I mean, if you're a proper big club institution, you decide on a manager and you go and get him. Whether Kevin Thelwell is thinking like that, whether Patrick Stewart's thinking like that, or the Americans, who knows? Probably not. I'm saying McInnes is the obvious choice. That's my opinion. The obvious choice from the outside when you're thinking about Kevin Thelwell would be Sean Dyche, I think, because he's out of work. They've worked together before. He probably is the kind of anti-Russell Martin. So if you're going to pivot and go in a completely different direction, Sean Dyche might be the man. And listen, I don't think Sean Dyche necessarily would be a bad appointment for Rangers, but I just think at this moment in time, for what's required and what they need, I think they have to go for Derek McInnes, and I'll be amazed if he's not on their radar, not on a shortlist, and if contact isn't made with Hearts to go and ask the question at least. I don't know what Jacko thinks of
that. Look, everybody knows that, what I think of Derek McInnes as a manager. I've said it for long enough. It's a tricky one. What I would say to that, Scott, is what I refer you to my earlier answer. Do you know what? If that was the call, if that's the call they decide to make, and I think you're absolutely right in everything that you've just said, if they make that call, do you know who's going to have to interview really well? Not Derek McInnes, but Kevin Thelwell and Patrick Stewart. Because Derek McInnes has shown, and it was the toughest decision of his professional career when he had basically accepted the Rangers job when he was at Aberdeen, and then Dave King shifted the goalposts on him at the 11th hour. His first meeting with Dave King was enough for Derek McInnes to decide, I can't work with this guy. I don't trust him. And if Derek McInnes was put in exactly the same position, wow, how difficult does that become for him? If he looks at what's there and thinks, I'm not sure I trust these guys. But he's turned Rangers down once. You don't get to turn Rangers down. Hardly anybody gets to turn them down twice. And if he turns them down, you know, certainly not going to be a third invitation.
No. So
all these things would have to factor into his decision making on that. But I think that he's shown, and that talks to the integrity that he's got as a guy, that in that situation, when all he wanted was to become the manager of Rangers, he felt he couldn't do it. And by the way, you correctly mentioned Walter Smith. Walter Smith was involved in that whole process. Derek McInnes turned to Walter Smith for advice, told him how his conversation had gone with Dave King, and let's just say that Derek McInnes was acting, having received the counsel of, you know, the guy that he respects as the greatest Rangers manager of all time, and he made that decision based upon his conversation with Walter Smith. So, you know, having been in that situation once, wow, could you imagine that he's put into it for a second time? And also, if I'm Tony Bloom, I'm probably sitting him down right now saying, right, Derek, there's a potential problem here. What can I give you? What do we need? What do we need in terms of the squad in January? What can I do for you? What about your contract? Can I make this an impossible position for Derek McInnes to walk away from everything that I'm prepared to put on the table for him, especially if he's going into an environment at Rangers where he's not sure that he's really wanted, he's not sure that he's really, you know, he's not Russell Martin. And that's clearly what Kevin Thelwell wanted to work. Well, Derek McInnes is a step in a very different direction. And people talk about that as well. And, you know, for a long time, Rangers fans kind of look down their nose a little bit. We don't like the football. We don't like... I'm watching that Hearts side right now. It's 4-4-2. It's up and at them. It's wingers. It's crosses into the box. It's exciting. It's front-footed. It's aggressive. It's everything that I'm sure the Rangers support would absolutely lap up if they were getting to watch that on a weekly basis at their own stadium.
There's plenty of support for Derek McInnes in the comment section, guys. But I think a lot of people watching aren't convinced that he would leave Hearts. This one, John says, why would McInnes give up a cushy number at Hearts with the backing of Tony Bloom on top of the SPFL for a potential banana skin at Ibrox? Green Machine says Derek McInnes will be the next Scotland manager. David Watson says, do you really think Derek McInnes would leave the Jambos? However, Luke says, Derek McInnes for me, go and get him, Rangers. And Rebel says, money talks, Keith. If Dale gets the call, he will go. And as I say, there's a few other names doing the rounds as well. Craigie says, I'm sure Kevin Muscat deal finishes in the next few weeks, but I still say Stevie G's.
That's not correct.
Is that not correct? No?
It's not correct. Kevin Muscat has got over 12 months left on his current deal. I think he's at Shanghai Port, Chinese Super League, and he's contracted to them until the end of next year, I believe.
Wow. Okay.
So there would be a hefty compensation fee involved if it was to be Muscat.
In terms of Gerrard, Daniel, I don't know if Keith will agree. I don't know if the situation's changed that much for Steven Gerrard since the last time we spoke about this. I spoke to somebody this morning, you know, who's kind of close to him, and their view was that nothing had really changed. I mean, his kids are now back at school in Bahrain. I think Jack had the story in the summer about how that was a big factor in terms of moving his family back over. I think one day Steven Gerrard might return to Rangers as manager, but I'm just not sure it's now. I totally understand why a lot of Rangers fans would want him back, and I don't necessarily again think it'd be a bad appointment because he ticks a lot of the boxes that I've just spoken about in terms of being a figurehead, knowing what it takes to win at Rangers, understanding the club, knowing Scottish football. So he ticks all of those boxes, but I'm just not sure the timing is right again for Steven Gerrard. Again, it's up to Rangers and the hierarchy there to go and ask the question. And if you really want someone, then you should go and push the boat out and get them, just like I'm saying about McInnes. But I'm not convinced about the Gerrard thing will happen, even though I understand why he's one of the big favourites.
We actually have a story on Record Sport Online now. It went up just before we come on air. It's from our transfer guru, Scott Burns. He says it's his understanding that Gerrard would have serious reservations about coming back over the state of the Rangers squad. Keith?
I think anybody would. Maybe a lot of people would look at it and say there's some talent in there. And maybe there is some talent in there. Maybe just Russell Martin wasn't capable of organising them and getting it out of them. But yeah, I think that would be a concern. Wow, look what you've done to that place in a very short space of time. And who's going to be in charge of the recruitment in January? Always come back to the same questions, really, doesn't it? But I think with Steven Gerrard, I believe that Scott's probably close to the truth on that one. I don't think there's any great rush for Steven Gerrard to want to get back to Britain in particular just now. I think there's family reasons and financial reasons which make that so. And maybe at some point in the future it becomes a clearer path. But at this minute in time, I think the same rules would apply, which kind of saw him take himself out of the contention for it in the summer. I'm not sure that he's also, what I would say about Steven Gerrard, I'm not sure that if Rangers did go and get him and they persuaded him and they lured him and they said, well, you can do anything, we'll back you at the hilt. I'm not sure you're getting the same Steven Gerrard. I think that Steven Gerrard looks a bit bruised and maybe even a bit jaundiced with some of the experiences that he's had since leaving the position at Ibrox. I'm just not sure that he's got the same hunger and desire. Because if you remember back then, Steven Gerrard thought he was on a trajectory which would catapult him at some point in the very near future into Jurgen Klopp's shoes at Anfield. Yeah. It hasn't happened. The dream hasn't worked out the way that Steven Gerrard thought it was going to. This whole management adventure, he was dead excited, he was motivated for it, he was hungry for it. It's I don't know if that spark is going to be there. I don't know if you'd be getting the same Steven Gerrard. I think he's maybe been a bit too damaged by what he's experienced, and he's a proud guy. He was a top player. It goes without saying what he achieved as a player. So I'm sure there's an element of ego there, that when you go into management, having carved out the career for yourself that he did on the pitch, well, when you step into the dugout, you're looking to do the same thing, aren't you? And if you can't do it, then I just think there's a bit of pride and ego that gets involved, and it starts to wear you down a little bit. I'm just not sure that this version of Steven Gerrard is the guy that Rangers need right now.
Well, I mean, before we start to wrap up, guys, looking at the odds for the next Rangers manager, it's Steven Gerrard that is the heavy favourite at the minute. You can see there that's with Bet365 on odds checker. It's Steven Gerrard the favourite. The other name though that I need to bring up before we finish, guys, is that of Barry Ferguson, because we're getting a lot of comments in on him. Obviously, I don't think he would have expected to have his name thrown about as coming back to Rangers 7 league games into this season. But here we are.
Maybe he did.
Maybe he did, eh?
Maybe this is exactly what he anticipated. I don't know. But I tell you what, Daniel, here's a wee exclusive. You can ask him yourself on Wednesday night, because I think Barry will be coming on to Hotline Live, coming into the studio, and anything that you want to ask him, then feel free. I rather suspect that Barry's view on life just now, I think he's quite content. I think he thoroughly enjoyed his short spell, and I think if Rangers had invited him to extend that, I'm damn sure that he would have done. But I think he's settled back into a sort of slower paced way of life. He does a little bit of media on the radio. He obviously does a column with the Daily Record. He's got his ambassadorial duties with Rangers. So by all to all intents and purposes, I think that's fine for Barry Ferguson. It is a different question though if somebody was to go to him and say, "Would you do it?" I completely get that. That'd be a difficult one for him not to show an interest in. And even if you just said to him, "Do you know what?" And here's a potential scenario. What if the Americans go, "Right, this has been a really lousy start to our first season. We need to take time. We need to assess the situation. We can look at the work that Barry and Neil McCann and Billy Dodds did towards the end of last season. And they were starting to move the club in a more favourable direction." So you could say to them, would you be interested in taking this until the end of the season? Give us time to do all the stuff around the club that we need to do. And then, by the way, if you've done a really good job, then let's talk. But if not, then Rangers have the opportunity to move on again next summer. I don't know. These are all things that will be getting battered about the boardroom right now. As I said, my information was there was a sort of crisis meeting of the board this afternoon, and it's at exactly these sort of scenarios that will be getting discussed, because there is also this position you've got to remember. And Scott and I were talking just before we came on. Rangers need a manager in place this time next week in order to start preparing the players and the team for a home game against Dundee United. Now, look at the length of time it took them to arrive at the conclusion that Russell Martin was the right guy the last time. So, and who have they got right now around about Auchenhowie? What you got to do? Ask the person that's in charge of the women's team to step up, take the men's team against Dundee United? Or do you actually need to start putting a plan B together, which is, right, if we can't get the guy that we want in now, you need to start planning for 10 days' time when Dundee United are at Ibrox. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that needs consideration. So no wonder they call it crisis talks.
That goes back to what I said a couple of weeks ago in here, Daniel, in terms of the role of the sporting director. I mean, this shouldn't take Rangers long, because
part of Kevin sitting in his top drawer.
Part of Kevin Thelwell's remit is to see round these corners. I mean, my God, if he's not been watching what's been happening the last few weeks, the last couple of months with Russell Martin, the relationship with the fans, and above all else, results and performances, of course he must have been thinking about who the next manager is. I mean, that's part of the gig. I'm not saying he should have one name and that's it, ready to go, but he should have 2 or 3 names who he clearly thinks are the ones that are right to step in. And that process should have started yesterday, should be well underway already. So Jacko's right, it shouldn't take long. They need to do this within a week. There's got to be a manager in place for the Dundee United game, 100%. And I think the manager needs a few days before that. He's got players away in international duty, so it's a kind of difficult time for a manager to come in. So, I mean, give him a chance to try and hit the ground running. That Dundee United game, I mean, depending on who they appoint, that Dundee United game, if they got a full house in there and the fans are really behind this appointment, if they could go and get 3 points, it might just kickstart them. It might just kickstart these players. We might see something in these players that we've not seen up until this point, and they could maybe build a wee bit of momentum. So it's absolutely.
Do you not think there will be a reconnection with the fans, just purely on the basis that whoever is in the dugout is not Russell Martin?
I think so, but I think there's going to be. I think this appointment. I think the fans need to back it. You'll know right away. You'll get the vibe and the feeling from punters whether they're behind the new guy or no. Obviously, it was the opposite when Russell Martin get the job. But I think if they get this, I'm not. What Andy said earlier on, they can't just listen to fans solely and base the decision on who the punters want. But they need to read the room. They need to know what this next guy has to look at in terms of his qualities and his attributes. And as I say, I think if the fans are behind it, then you'll see a real kind of surge of support for that Dundee United game. And that's probably what they need to kind of try and kickstart this season.
what I think what they need as well, Scott, is for it not to look like, I'm sorry to keep coming back to it, but a Kevin Thirlwell appointment. I think there's one name that's already surfaced, and that's Danny Roll, previously at Sheffield Wednesday. That has got the blue sky thinking of the summer all over it. It's got Kevin Thirlwell's fingerprints all over it.
The latest
could you imagine how that plays out if it was an appointment like that, how the Rangers fans react to that?
That's what I mean about reading the room. I mean, that just can't happen. I mean, just, with all due respect to Danny Rowe, but an appointment like that can't. I don't even think, there's other names being mentioned. I don't even think like Marco Rose or Mark Van Bommel, these guys have been mentioned. I don't even think that's going to wash with punters. Honestly, I think there's, of all the names being mentioned, we talk about the boxes that need to be ticked. I think you're looking at McInnes, Gerrard, Deitch, Muscat, maybe to a lesser extent, even Barry Ferguson. I actually think there's going to be back in a disrespect towards Barry Ferguson in terms of people completely ruling him out of this and almost kind of disregarding what he did last season. I know it wasn't perfect at the end of last season, but I tell you what, he still got big results against Celtic, against Fenerbahce. He brought a bit of the standards back. He had to do it with players that weren't his, players who'd failed before. Do I think Rangers will go for Barry Ferguson, or do I think Kevin Thirlwell will be thinking about him? Probably not, but I tell you what, there's a lot of names on that bookie list that would be far worse bets than Barry Ferguson for the Rangers job, even though ultimately I don't think he'll probably get it.
Well, for now, guys, I think that brings us to the end of Monday night's Hotline Live with Record Sport. Thank you very much for all the comments tonight. They have been fantastic as always. We really appreciate it. And whatever happens, we will have you covered for all of the latest news on the next Rangers manager here in the Hotline Live.
Yeah, you just know this is going to be a saga now, Scott. You're sitting there saying, "Oh, we've got to get it done in a week." We could be sitting here 5 weeks' time having the same conversation.
I've got a single day off tomorrow. I think I'm just going to sit in a dark room the whole day. Seriously, I'll see you on Wednesday.
I think on that note, guys, thanks very much for watching at home. Scott, Keith, it's always a pleasure. And as I say, hope you can join us at 6 p.m. tomorrow. Cheers.
Cheers, Dan. Thanks, everyone.